hard to get and maintain them in Nevada. So once again, that's a money conversation.
I'll touch on a couple of things. One is one reason you don't see additional mental health cuts in this budget as opposed to growth is the Affordable Care Act. One of the gifts to Nevada was that many of the people who receive our state mental health services now will become eligible for Medicaid. Again, newly eligible folks are paid for 100% by the federal government for the first 3 years. So we're basically able to shift a fair proportion of our mental health population onto federal funding. I think that's, again, something like $75 million that wouldn't have been there potentially in the mental health budget if it weren't for the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion. So that's going to help. On the other hand, I think it's back to what Teresa said at the beginning. It's a matter of revenues to expand payment rates so that people are more interested in serving Medicaid folks, and to have more money to put into the mental health budget, so we're not just taking the Medicaid money and taking money out of the mental health budget, but leaving enough in there to actually grow services. There's some potential, I think, as Senator Hickey said, in managed care. Right now, all the managed care population is women and children on that side of the Medicaid program. We don't have any of our age, blind, and disabled folks in managed care. That's going to be a huge challenge for those of you in the room to make sure there's a system there that's really responsive to their needs, and that you really get the benefits of good case management, etc., rather than introducing just the profit motive into the system, and therefore people get less services or more barriers or hurdles for services. So the design of that system will help. But the bottom line is we need more money, and we're not going to get any more money unless we raise some more revenues. And that's not a whole other discussion that Teresa mentioned.
I think one of the things that I've always used in my repertoire of trying to get myself motivated is the saying, if you can't fix it, feature it. So I would look at the new discussions across the nation on gun control, and make sure that you're wedging in your mental health elements into that, because I think that's an opportunity to provide a total solution, and it needs to weigh very heavily, I think, in the discussion. Nevadans are very attached to their guns, so they'll be looking for opportunities to make people feel safer. And I think if you're in there at the committee hearings talking about mental health issues, then you're educating legislators, and I think that's one of the things that they value from you guys, is the opportunity to get educated about how mental health would impact all aspects of our lives. And I certainly will be there with the #1 state in homicides via guns are domestic violence victims. So I plan to be there as well. So you got to look at those opportunities and to slice in another piece of education and go for it.
No, just briefly, I think both Teresa and John said more, quite a bit, and both alluded to the growth of service providers, and especially I'd like to see expanded to more nonprofits and not just the huge managed care operators in the state, Amerigroup and United Health, and I think they do a good job, generally speaking. So I think that those services could possibly open up for niche plans and things, or pilot programs, if you will, like Vegas is doing with the 24/7 care to address the area of mental health more effectively. We do have more money in one sense with the expansion of Medicaid, and some of it coming from the federal level.
So, Stacey, I have a question to follow up. So the Human Services Network has the 3 priorities of access to health care, mental health, and employment. There's really a 4th one that we don't talk very much about. and that is this idea of revenue reform. And the metaphor that comes best to me is a car needs all 4 tires to move. And if at the depths of our economic difficulties we were down to 1 tire, our health and human service system now has 2 tires, perhaps, if we're lucky. So I really see this as a discussion that we need more money to provide the kinds of services that our constituents need. And there is a proposal on the table by the, I think it's called the Teachers Initiative, that would raise additional monies by imposing a 2% margin tax on businesses making over $1 million. So really, this is maybe putting our 2 representatives on the spot a little bit, Assemblyman Pat Hickey and Assemblywoman Teresa Benitez Thompson. Will you support that initiative?
Well, and I'm going to answer some of the tax cuts coming from in the governor's proposal, and that was in an existing tax, so we can talk about something that we are dealing with, that being the modified business tax. And as it's been pointed out, about 270,000 businesses may be exempted because of raising the ceiling of who are taxed. It goes from about 250,000 gross for an annual year up to 340,000. So who are those people who are going to be given a tax break? Well, I'd say those are most certainly small businesses and middle class Nevadans. If you're grossing anywhere annually between $250,000 or $340,000, you're certainly a small business, in all likelihood, middle-class citizen of the state. With respect to the margins tax, I'd only correct one thing. It's not over $1 million of profits. It's of gross receipts, and I will also make the argument that in this day and age, even grossing $1 million does not make you a prosperous business. As an owner of a painting company, I can tell you we're lucky when we gross $1 million, and when we do, at least over the last 4 or 5 years, we are not making any profit. So that piece of legislation, we don't know whether the Supreme Court are going to allow it, but I believe Speaker Kirkpatrick has indicated that even if it is thrown out on some technical reason, she's going to bring up a version of the gross receipts tax that we are going to discuss. And I'll just say this. I am not philosophically opposed to taxes, but my question will always be, who can and when can people afford to pay them? And I think there are many businesses and business owners who will tell you that we're not out of this recession, and it's going to be a very difficult time to expect they're going to be raised this time. And you probably will see that not pass this time regardless in whatever form it comes to us.
Thanks. So I served the last session on the Assembly Taxation Committee. I'm returning this session to the Assembly Taxation Committee. My actual lineup of committees real quick are Health and Human Services, Taxation, and Government Affairs. I served on all 3 last session, loved the subject matter, asked to be returned to those 3 this session. And so I think I'm one of the few legislators that raised their hand and said, yes, put me back on the Taxation Committee. Last session, we did really hard work in the Assembly and also on the Senate side to have a conversation about what a better tax structure is for Nevada. And part of that conversation was a margins tax. We actually had pretty good support, I think even a fair amount of support from the business community to come forward. Right now, the modified business tax, I think, is one that a lot of people have trouble with. It's a tax on employee heads, so for every business over a certain amount, and Pat quoted, what is it, 350,000? Did you say, Pat?
Well, I think in the proposal, it'll go up. Yeah.
It'll go.
It'll go up to 300.
And then it's for every employee you have, there's a tax that you pay. So we definitely think that there's a better way other than the modified business tax to gain revenue that doesn't punish employers, especially small employers that want to bring more people on board and get them employed. And at an employment rate that's 10.5% and keeps kind of going back and forth between whether it wants to rise or fall in Nevada every month, that's an important consideration. It was part of our philosophical discussion last session was, how do we get a better tax in place? And so we talked about a service tax and we talked about that margins tax. I think the teachers are going in the right direction, and I think it was, for a legislator, really interesting to sit back and watch and see how is the public going to respond to this? What is the dialogue going to be about this? And I think the public is responding really well. I think that as opposed to the initiative process, I do support the legislative process where we can get in there and have multiple public hearings like we did last session on a margin tax and say what is best, what numbers are we looking at? Are we looking at gross receipts? Are we looking at pure profit? And what we proposed last session, actually, I think it was over $1 million, and we were looking at pure profit. And we thought that would get support, and the support we did get from the business community, because it took a lot of the burden of the taxes that are paid right now of smaller businesses, and kind of we were focused more on kind of the big corporations. And I think that's the conversation you're going to see us having again, is right, kind of in that type of vein of something that's fair to small business, something that's fair to the middle class, but something that's really going to help us generate revenue in the state.
Next question. My boss.
If I go on too long, you cut me off. No repercussions.
I have the power right now.
I think this is a really thoughtful discussion, and I really appreciate all of you up there for your public service.